The moment I turned 18, my parents started charging me rent. They said it was because I was the stronger one. Meanwhile, my sister got a free ride. They saw my strength as something they could just use. So, years later, when their world fell apart and they came running to me for help, I agreed. But first, I handed them an invoice. An itemized bill for every time they played favorites. This is the story of how I made them settle their debt, not with yelling matches, but with cold, hard numbers. From the time my sister, Amelia, was born, our roles were clear. She was the golden child, this delicate little thing who needed to be coddled. I was the tough one, the kid who could apparently get by on scraps of attention. It wasn't some big, dramatic movie scene thing. It was in the little stuff, the day-to-day. A glass breaks? It must have been my fault. Amelia gets a B? My parents would gush about how hard she tried. I get a B? The question was always, why wasn't this an A? Amelia got everything, presents, opportunities, constant reassurance. Her hobbies were paid for, her screw-ups were brushed aside, and her feelings always came first. I figured out pretty quick that I had to be self-sufficient. I learned not to ask for much because the answer was always a lecture about how tight money was, or how I needed to be more understanding. It drove a wedge between me and Amelia that was less of a crack and more of a canyon. We weren't sisters, we were opponents in a game I was rigged to lose. Then came my 18th birthday. My parents sat me down for the talk, but it wasn't about college or my future. It was about rent. My dad, with this super serious face, told me it was time I learned what responsibility felt like. You have a job, you're an adult now, he said. It's only fair you pay your way. They wanted $400 a month. $400 for my tiny childhood bedroom in a house they already owned. I was just floored. I looked at my mom, hoping she'd stick up for me, but she just nodded along. You're the stronger one, she said. It was the same line they'd used my whole life to pile more onto my shoulders. Amelia, well, she just needs a little more help. Amelia was 16. She had a part-time job, but that money was for hanging out with friends, not for survival. The sheer unfairness of it all felt like a brick in my stomach. I wanted to scream, to rattle off a list of every single double standard. But what was the point? They'd just say I was being difficult. My own strength was being used against me, giving them permission to demand more from me and less from her. So, like I always did, I just bit my tongue and said okay. The next few years were just a total grind. I worked 2 jobs to cover my rent and scraped together money for community college. My life was a miserable loop. Wake up before the sun for a shift at the diner, race to class, then work a closing shift at a retail store. I lived on instant ramen, bought all my textbooks used, and said no to every party, every late-night hangout, basically, everything that's supposed to make your college years worth remembering. All the while, Amelia was just gliding through life on a cloud of our parents' cash. Funny how my $400 a month never seemed to help their so-called money problems, yet there was always enough for Amelia's new car, her weekend trips, or whatever designer bag she decided she needed. The house I was paying to live in became just a place to crash. That feeling of being an outsider turned into a giant gulf. I wasn't their kid anymore, I was a tenant. A source of income that was paying for the exact life they refused to let me have. The final straw, the thing that just completely severed any sense of duty I had left, happened on a random Tuesday. I'd come home early from work, sick with the flu, and I overheard my parents in the kitchen. They were laughing, planning their anniversary trip, a 2-week cruise. Thank goodness for the extra income, my mom said, sounding so cheerful. It's making this all possible. The extra income. That was me. My long hours, my exhaustion, my missed youth, it was their vacation fund. In that moment, all my resentment hardened into something colder, more methodical. I knew fighting was useless. Begging them to be fair was a complete waste of time. The only language they ever really understood was money. So, I decided I'd learn to speak it. That night, I opened a spreadsheet and called it the favoritism ledger. I started with the rent. $400 a month for 3 years straight. That was $14,400. Then, I kept going. I dug through old bank statements. There was the $5,000 they put toward Amelia's car. The $1,000 for her spring break trip. The endless hundreds on clothes, concerts, and dinners. I made a column for myself right next to hers, and it was just blank. Painfully blank. That ledger became my secret obsession, my quiet little act of rebellion. Every time they'd ask me for more or buy Amelia some new expensive toy, I didn't get mad. I just opened my laptop and added a new line. I was keeping a detailed account of their betrayal. A year later, with my ledger getting longer and a little bit of savings I'd managed to keep hidden, I moved out. No big scene. I just packed my stuff while they were out and left a note that said, "My rent is paid for the month. I've moved out." The feeling of freedom was unbelievable. I got a tiny apartment, threw myself into my studies, and slowly built a life that was actually mine. For years, I kept my distance. I launched a career, made real friends, and found a sense of self that had nothing to do with them. And the whole time, I kept the ledger updated. A quiet little reminder of the debt they still owed me. Nearly a decade went by. My contact with my parents was the bare minimum, quick, polite calls on birthdays and holidays. I'd heard through family gossip that Amelia never really got her act together. She just kind of drifted between dead-end jobs, still leaning heavily on my parents. And then, the call I always knew would come, finally did. My father's company had downsized, and he was pushed into an early retirement he couldn't afford. On top of that, my mom's health declined, and the medical bills were stacking up. Amelia, with her credit card debt and zero stability, was no help at all. My dad called on a Sunday night, his voice totally lacking its usual command. He laid it all out, the lost pension, the debt, the fact that the bank was threatening to foreclose. They were going under. And then he said the words I'd been waiting 10 years to hear, "We need your help. You're our only hope. You were always the stronger one." I agreed to meet them the next Saturday. They looked so much older, just worn down by stress. They explained their whole mess, throwing out numbers and desperate pleas. They needed me to cover their mortgage and give them a monthly allowance just to get by. Amelia was there too, sitting next to them and looking annoyed, like this whole thing was just a huge inconvenience for her. I let them finish. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no. I just reached into my bag, pulled out a folder, and slid it across the table. My father opened it. Inside was a 20-page, professionally bound document. It was the favoritism ledger, complete with itemized entries, dates, and a grand total at the end, adjusted for inflation. "What is this?" my mother whispered. Her face was white. "It's an invoice," I said, my voice steady. "It's a bill for my childhood. It's for the rent I paid while my sister lived for free. It's for the car you bought her, the vacations you paid for, and the lifestyle you gave her at my expense." I pointed to the final number. "The total comes to $126,452.17. You need my help, and I'm willing to give it. But first, we're settling this debt. Every dollar I give you will be subtracted from this balance. This isn't a handout. It's a repayment." The silence was heavy enough to feel. Amelia actually scoffed and muttered something about me being crazy. My mom started to cry. But my dad just stared at the papers. I could see it on his face, the shock, the horror, and then, finally, the understanding. For the first time ever, the consequences of his choices were right in front of him, not as an emotional argument he could brush off, but as a balance sheet. He couldn't fight it. He couldn't ignore it. All he could do was accept it. They didn't really have a choice, so they agreed to my terms. I didn't kick them out of their house, and I'm not letting them starve. I set up a trust that pays their essential bills directly. Every single payment is recorded, and the balance on my ledger goes down. Our relationship isn't parent and child anymore. It's a transaction. There's no warmth there, just the quiet satisfaction of watching a debt get paid. Some people might hear this and call me cruel or say that revenge is hollow. They're wrong. This was never about revenge, it was about justice. It was about making them finally look at the truth they'd spent decades ignoring. I don't feel the weight of their expectations anymore, or the sting of being second best. I'm not the strong one they can use, and I'm not the scapegoat they can blame. I'm just free. And that freedom is worth more than any amount of money, so that's my story. I know it's a lot, and I'm sure there are a million different opinions on whether I did the right thing. It makes me wonder, what would you have done? Would you have just forgiven them, or would you have sent them the bill? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'm genuinely curious to hear. And if you found this story interesting, feel free to give it a like and subscribe for more. Thanks for listening.